Welcome back to Quiet History by Sound. Tonight, we are traveling far into the ancient past. Imagine opening your eyes early in the morning, more than 3,000 years ago. There are no cars outside your home, no electric lights, no phones, no clocks ticking beside your bed. Instead, somewhere beyond the walls of your house, you hear birds calling from the reeds. The first warm light of morning is beginning to appear above the eastern horizon, and nearby, flowing slowly through the landscape, is the river that makes almost everything around you possible. The Nile. This is ancient Egypt. But tonight, we will not spend our time inside the palace of a pharaoh. We will not follow armies into battle. And we will not concentrate on pyramids, royal tombs, or famous kings. Instead, we will spend an ordinary day with the people who actually made the Egyptian civilization work. Farmers, bakers, craftsmen, fishermen, scribes, mothers, fathers, and children. What did they eat? What were their homes like? How did they work? What did they wear? What did children do during the day? And when the sun finally disappeared beyond the desert, how did an ordinary Egyptian family settle down for the night? So find a comfortable place to rest. Let the modern world become quiet around you, and let us begin another peaceful journey into the past. For many ancient Egyptians, the day began with the rising sun. The climate was warm, and beginning work early allowed people to make use of the cooler hours of morning. For farming families, the fields were never far from their thoughts. Egypt was surrounded by desert, yet along the Nile stretched a narrow ribbon of fertile land. This contrast was one of the defining features of the Egyptian life. Beyond the cultivated fields lay dry desert. Within the river valley, crops could flourish. For thousands of years, the Nile's seasonal flooding deposited fertile soil along its banks. Farmers also constructed and maintained canals and irrigation systems to direct water where it was needed. Without the river, ancient Egyptian civilization could not have developed in the form we know today. So, imagine waking in a small village not far from the water. Your home is simple. Its walls are made from mud brick. The flat roof provides additional space. The floor beneath your feet is hard packed earth. Furniture is limited. Perhaps there are stools, a low bed or sleeping platform, storage containers, woven baskets, mats, and pottery vessels containing food, grain, water, or oil. A wealthy Egyptian family might live in a much larger home with gardens, servants, decorated rooms, and comfortable furniture. But for the majority of farming families, life was considerably simpler. The morning begins, and before long, everyone has something to do. The first meal of the day would probably look modest to modern eyes. Bread was one of the foundations of the Egyptian diet. So was beer. Ancient Egyptian beer was not exactly like the clear bottled drink familiar today. It could be thick, cloudy, nourishing, and closely connected with the grain economy. It was consumed by ordinary workers and could also form part of their compensation. Bread came in many shapes and varieties. Most ordinary families depended heavily on grains, especially wheat and barley. Depending upon wealth and availability, a meal might also include onions, dates, figs, vegetables, perhaps some fish. Meat was much less common for poorer families than it was for the wealthy. For most people, meals were practical rather than extravagant. Imagine sitting near the doorway of a mud brick house. Morning light enters the room. Someone breaks a loaf of bread. A clay container sits nearby. Outside, neighbors are already moving toward the fields. There is nothing remarkable about this breakfast to the family eating it. It is simply the beginning of another working day. For much of ancient Egyptian history, agriculture formed the foundation of the economy. A large proportion of the population worked directly or indirectly with the land. The agricultural year was shaped by the Nile. Traditionally, Egyptians understood the year through three broad seasons connected to the river and farming. There was the period of inundation when the Nile flooded. Then came the growing season, and finally the harvest. The rhythm of the river became the rhythm of life. When fields were ready, farmers plowed the soil, seeds were scattered, animals could be driven across the ground to help press seeds into the earth. Canals required maintenance. Water needed to be directed. Later came harvesting. Grain had to be cut, collected, transported, threshed, and stored. None of this was easy work. There were no tractors, no electric pumps, no mechanical harvesters. Much depended upon human labor, animals, wooden tools, baskets, ropes, and experience accumulated across generations. A farmer learned to understand the land, the river, the season, and the crops. These were not abstract subjects. They determined whether the household would have enough food. For ancient Egyptians, the Nile's annual inundation was one of the most important events of the year. The river brought water and renewed the agricultural land. Its importance went far beyond farming. The Nile influenced religion, transportation, trade, settlement, government, and even the way Egyptians understood their country. A good inundation could help produce abundant crops. A poor one could bring hardship. Too much water could also cause problems. Egyptian authorities therefore had strong reasons to monitor the river and organize irrigation. During the flood season, when ordinary agricultural work was reduced in affected areas, labor could be redirected toward other projects. This is one reason the familiar image of pyramid construction by masses of permanently enslaved workers is misleading. Evidence indicates that major royal projects could use organized labor forces who were provisioned or compensated, including agricultural workers available during parts of the year when fields could not be worked normally. The monuments that survive today were impressive, but behind every monument were ordinary people, people who needed bread, water, shelter, tools, and rest. After several hours in the fields, imagine returning toward the settlement. The village is not silent. Someone is grinding grain. Another person is shaping pottery. Children move between houses. Animals occupy nearby enclosures. A dog wanders through the shade. Smoke rises from cooking. The houses themselves are built largely from one of Egypt's most readily available materials, mud. Mud mixed with straw could be formed into bricks and dried beneath the sun. Stone was used extensively for temples, tombs, monuments, and important structures because of its durability. But ordinary homes were commonly made from mud brick. This means much of everyday ancient Egypt has disappeared. A stone temple can survive for thousands of years. A modest mud brick house is far more vulnerable to weather, rebuilding, and time. As a result, the ancient Egypt we see in photographs today can give us a distorted impression. We see enormous stone monuments, but most Egyptians did not spend their lives inside enormous stone buildings. They lived in homes, villages, workshops, and neighborhoods that looked far more modest. Not everyone was a farmer. Egyptian society depended upon many different kinds of skilled workers. Carpenters made furniture and equipment. Potters produced containers used throughout daily life. Weavers created linen. Metal workers produced tools and objects. Stone workers shaped monuments. Artists decorated tombs and temples. Fishermen worked along the Nile. Boatmen transported people and goods. Bakers produced bread. Brewers made beer. There were also administrators and scribes. Becoming a skilled craftsman could offer a different life from agricultural labor. One particularly fascinating community was Deir el Medina, home to skilled workers involved in constructing and decorating royal tombs near ancient Thebes. Documents surviving from such communities reveal something remarkable. Ancient Egyptians complained, negotiated, missed work, argued, borrowed things, lent things, bought household goods, had family disputes, and worried about everyday problems. The people of ancient Egypt can sometimes seem mysterious because they lived so long ago. But when their ordinary records survive, they suddenly become much more familiar. Now imagine entering a quieter room. A man sits with writing materials. He is a scribe. Literacy offered access to important occupations in ancient Egypt. Government administration required records. Taxes had to be tracked, goods counted, land measured, letters written, religious texts copied, workforces organized. The scribal profession could therefore provide considerable status. Writing itself required training. Egyptian scribes used several forms of script over the long history of the civilization. Hieroglyphs are the most famous today, especially because of their appearance on monuments. But everyday administrative writing could use faster cursive forms. A young person training as a scribe had to practice again and again, copying signs, learning words, memorizing texts. Ancient school exercises sometimes preserve the frustrations and advice familiar to students in almost any age. Study carefully. Do your work. Do not be lazy. Respect your teacher. 3,000 years later, some things have changed very little. Most Egyptian children did not grow up preparing to become scribes. Their daily lives depended greatly upon their family's social position. Children in farming households learned the practical skills needed by the family. They helped with animals, gardens, food preparation, household tasks, and eventually agricultural work. Children from families with specialized trades might learn those occupations. Education in formal settings was much more accessible to certain groups, particularly boys preparing for scribal or administrative careers. But whatever their social class, children still found time to play. Archaeologists have discovered toys from ancient Egypt, bowls, dolls, small animal figures. Games were enjoyed by adults as well. One of the most famous was Senet, a board game with a history stretching back thousands of years. Children also swam, ran, played outdoors, and probably invented countless games that left no archaeological trace at all. We know the objects that survived, but laughter does not survive in the ground. Neither do jokes or games made up for a single afternoon. Still, we can reasonably imagine them. Children have always found ways to turn ordinary places into playgrounds. Egypt's climate influenced clothing. Linen was the characteristic fabric of ancient Egyptian dress. It was made from flax and was well suited to the warm environment. Men might wear simple kilts or wrapped garments. Women often wore dresses of various forms. Clothing changed over Egypt's very long history and differed according to status and period. Wealthy Egyptians could afford finer linen and more elaborate clothing. Jewelry was also popular. Men and women could wear necklaces, bracelets, rings, and amulets. Cosmetics were important too. The dark eye cosmetic, commonly associated with Egyptian images, was worn by both men and women. Appearance mattered. So did cleanliness. Egyptians bathed frequently when circumstances allowed. Hair could be cut short or shaved, and wigs were worn in some settings. In a hot environment where lice could be troublesome, keeping hair short could also have practical advantages. The elegant images preserved on tomb walls therefore reflect more than fashion. They also reveal a society that placed considerable value on grooming and presentation. Women in ancient Egypt had legal rights that were unusual compared with women in some other ancient societies. They could own property, inherit property, enter contracts, and seek divorce. This did not make ancient Egypt a modern society with complete equality. Men dominated many public and administrative positions, but Egyptian women could possess a significant degree of legal and economic independence. For many women, much of everyday life revolved around the household. Food had to be prepared, grain ground, clothing produced or maintained, children cared for, gardens tended, water collected. These activities required enormous amounts of work. The Nile was not merely a source of water. Machines. It was Egypt's great almost without thought. Traveling overland through the surrounding deserts required difficult. Grinding grain alone could occupy hours. The valley. And when that work was finally finished, stewing, there was always another meal waiting in the future. Officials, soldiers, letters, and luxury goods. The Nile's current flowed north toward the Mediterranean. Prevailing winds could help sailing vessels travel south. This combination made river transportation particularly useful. Imagine standing near the bank in the afternoon. Small boats move nearby. Fishermen work from the water. Farther away, a larger vessel carries cargo. Cypress and reeds grow near the shore. Birds gather around the wetlands. Someone repairs a net. Another person unloads baskets. The river is not scenery, it is part of the workplace, part of the road system, part of the food supply, and part of the identity of Egypt itself. After a long morning of work, food becomes important again. For an ordinary family, bread remains central. There may be vegetables such as onions or leeks, legumes, dates, figs, perhaps fish from the Nile. Beer remains a common drink. The wealthy enjoy much greater variety. Their tables can include meat, poultry, wine, fruit, cakes, and other foods. Tomb paintings show elaborate scenes of food because abundance was something Egyptians hoped to continue enjoying in the afterlife. But for the majority of people, everyday meals were simpler. And yet, a simple meal after hours of physical labor could still be deeply satisfying. Imagine sitting in the shade. The afternoon is hot. Your hands are tired. Someone passes you bread. Conversation turns to the harvest. A neighbor, tomorrow's work, perhaps a festival approaching. Again, no one at this table thinks they are a part of an ancient civilization. They are simply hungry people having a meal. Religion was woven deeply into Egyptian life. The Egyptian worshipped many gods and goddesses. Some were associated with major forces of nature and kingship. Others were connected to family life, childbirth, protection, healing, particular towns, or specific occupations. Ra was closely associated with the sun, Osiris with death, regeneration, and the afterlife. Isis became one of Egypt's most important goddesses. Hathor was associated with love, joy, music, and motherhood, among other things. Thoth was linked with writing and knowledge. Bes and Taweret could be important in household religion and protection. The great temples were major institutions, but religion did not exist only inside monumental temple walls. Ordinary people could keep small amulets, make offerings, say prayers, observe festivals, ask for protection, and maintain household religious practices. The boundary between daily life and religion was not as sharp as a modern visitor might imagine. The gods were part of the world, the river, the sun, birth, death, harvest, health, family, all could be understood within a religious framework. Not every day was a work day. Ancient Egyptians celebrated numerous festivals connected with gods, temples, seasons, and royal events. Some could involve processions, music, food, drink, gatherings, and periods away from normal work. Beer played an important role in celebrations. Music and dancing were popular. Instruments included harps, flutes, drums, rattles, and other forms that changed over Egypt's long history. Festivals provided more than religious observance. They also interrupted the ordinary rhythm of work. Imagine a farmer who has spent days maintaining irrigation channels, a craft worker who has sat for hours shaping wood, a woman who has spent the morning grinding grain. A festival offers something different: music, conversation, food, friends, and perhaps more beer than usual. Ancient Egypt was deeply concerned with death and the afterlife, but that should not lead us to imagine Egyptians as people who spent their lives waiting to die. The evidence suggests quite the opposite. They valued life strongly enough that their ideal afterlife often resembled a perfected continuation of it. Even without a festival, people found ways to relax. Senet was among the most famous Egyptian board games. Other games existed as well. People listened to music, talked, drank beer, swam, went fishing, spent time with family. The Nile itself provided opportunities for recreation as well as work. Wealthier Egyptians could hunt. Gardens provided peaceful spaces. Children played. Adults exchanged stories. Somewhere in a village, two people might sit outside a house as the heat of the afternoon slowly begins to soften. Nothing historically important happens. No king arrives. No monument is completed. No battle begins. They simply talk. History contains countless moments like this. We know almost nothing about them, and yet they made up most of human life. As the afternoon moves toward the evening, look beyond the cultivated land. The contrast is extraordinary. Near the river, green fields, trees, gardens, villages, animals, people. Beyond them, desert. This division influenced the Egyptian imagination. The fertile Nile Valley represented life and order. The desert could represent danger and disorder, although it was also important for mining, travel, burial, and defense. The western desert became especially associated with the dead because the sun disappeared in the west. Many tombs and cemeteries were therefore located on the western side of the Nile. Every evening, Egyptians watched the sun descend toward that landscape, and every morning they watched it return. The daily cycle of the sun reinforced ideas of death and rebirth. Night did not mean the sun was gone forever. It would rise again. Now the working day is ending. The light becomes softer. Farmers return from the fields. Craftsmen put away their tools. Boats approach the riverbank. Animals are brought closer to the house. Inside the village, cooking begins. The evening meal might once again include bread, vegetables, beer, perhaps fish. Oil lamps provide light as darkness grows. An ordinary home does not contain many rooms. Family members spend much of their time together. Someone talks about the day's work. A child plays nearby. A piece of clothing needs attention. Tomorrow's tasks are considered. Outside, the temperature begins to fall. The desert that was intensely hot during the day cools beneath the night sky. There are no electric street lights. Once darkness arrives, it is truly dark. Only lamps, fires, moonlight, and stars break the night. Imagine stepping outside one final time. The village is quieter now. The Nile continues flowing nearby. Perhaps you can hear water moving gently against the bank. Above you stretches a sky largely untouched by artificial light. Thousands of stars are visible. To the ancient Egyptians, the heavens were not empty. The sky was connected with gods, time, calendars, seasons, and the journey after death. Priests and observers carefully watched celestial movements, but an ordinary farmer did not need to be an astronomer to appreciate the night. He had spent the day beneath the sun. Now the air was cooler. Tomorrow would bring more work. There would be fields to tend, water to manage, grain to process, food to prepare, children to care for, tools to repair. The civilization we call ancient Egypt continued because millions of ordinary days like this continued, one after another, year after year, generation after generation. Back inside the house, the oil lamp burns quietly. Sleeping arrangements vary with wealth. Beds existed and could be made from wood, sometimes with woven surfaces. Headdress rather than soft modern pillows were also used. Poorer families made do with simpler arrangements, including mats. The day's possessions are stored. Food is protected. The lamp must eventually be extinguished. Perhaps a final prayer is spoken. Perhaps parents settle their children. Perhaps someone is already asleep. The room becomes dark. Outside, insects continue their night sounds. A dog moves somewhere nearby. The Nile flows northward as it has done for generations. Tomorrow morning, the sun will return, and another ordinary day in ancient Egypt will begin. When we think of ancient Egypt today, we often imagine enormous things: the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, golden treasures, royal tombs, temples, pharaohs, and mummies. But the people who created that civilization spent most of their lives doing things that were much smaller. They baked bread, they brewed beer, they planted grain, they repaired tools, they carried water, they taught children, they played games, they worried about work, they celebrated festivals, they sat with family, and at the end of a long day, they slept. The Nile provided the foundation that allowed their civilization to flourish. But civilization itself was created through countless ordinary lives. Most of their names have disappeared. Most of their houses are gone. Their conversations vanished thousands of years ago. Yet traces remain: a child's toy, a worker's tool, a loaf placed inside a tomb, a letter, a board game, a painted wall showing someone harvesting grain, small pieces of lives once completely ordinary. And perhaps that is what makes daily history so fascinating. The pyramids remind us how different the ancient Egyptians were. But a piece of bread, a child's game, a tired worker returning home, or a family eating together as the sun goes down reminds us how similar they could also be. Thank you for joining me on another quiet journey through history. Tonight, we left the palaces and pyramids behind and spent an ordinary day beside the Nile. Until our next journey, rest well, sleep peacefully, and thank you for listening to Quiet History by Sen.